on LGBTQ. We started on Sunday, and I think on Sunday we did introduction, and I mentioned the areas that I'm going to highlight on in my presentation. I've been highlighting on various arguments which have interrogated the question of LGBTQ. And some of you joined on the way, others have come today. I think I've seen Professor Helen, Professor Ndiku, maybe sijasoma vizuri, but I think I've seen a name like that. The Mbatis, welcome, John, and others. I know others are going to join us on the way. And so on Sunday, I said that the whole week I'll be dealing with various arguments which have been put forward, interrogating the question of LGBTQ. I gave a definition of that. And on Monday, I dealt with the biological argument. Biological argument. I basically based my interrogation or my observation on a paper, a scientific paper written by two scientists from the University of California, Los Angeles, from the School of Medicine. And in the paper, I pointed out areas where they were emphasizing that first, we do not have adequate research that has been done to justify the fact that LGBT, and I was just summarizing by saying homosexual orientation, is genetically caused. There is no scientific research that has been done that shows that homosexuality is genetically caused. And I highlighted several places. And in any case, we also found that it is not possible for us to have a gene that determines homosexuality. The reason was simple. If there was such a gene, it would long have become extinct, because any trait that cannot be passed over to the offspring soon becomes extinct. And the fact that we have had homosexual behavior for over 4,000 years means that other causes should be investigated. I did mention, by basing on that research, on that paper, that there is something called epigenetics. Epigenetics is an alteration that occurs in the gene, which is caused by external factors, but that alteration does not change the genetical code of that gene. You know, it's the genetical code that determines traits. And so they explained that when a child is in the womb, it's possible for the mother to undergo certain experiences which generate hormones of varied kinds, and those hormones may affect the genes epigenetically of the child who's developing. And we also said that when that child is born, is already vulnerable, and depending on the environmental factors, that child may end up becoming homosexual. And so yesterday we now looked at non-scientific factors which can cause homosexuality. We investigated very many of them, and we zeroed in on the role of parents. We looked at the relationship between a son and a mother If that relationship is not healthy, it will cause that son to become homosexual. We talked about that. We talked about the moral environment, but we ended by mentioning that we cannot rule out the question of personal choice. Like in the case of heterosexual orientation, um, you have to choose whether you want to marry or not, even though, of course, you are normal, sexually speaking, but you can choose whether you marry or not. So the fact that I'm a heterosexual person genetically, it's a combination of so many factors that cause sexual orientation. So all those factors have combined and made me a heterosexual individual. Yet I have personal control over my sexual orientation. So a homosexual cannot say that, assuming that he has been made like that through the circumstances that we have been saying, he cannot claim that he does not have personal decision in deciding whether he should be a homosexual or not. Yet, of course, we have already ruled out the genetical factor in determining homosexual behavior. So we looked at those other factors which could cause homosexuality. Now, today we are going to look at something that's a bit, I don't know whether I can say philosophical or controversial, the ethical argument. The ethical argument. We are interrogating homosexuality using the ethical argument. And let me begin by defining what I mean by ethics. Ethics is the code of conduct upon which the rightness or wrongness of one's behavior is measured. So ethics is what is morally right or what is morally wrong according to a particular society. So it's the code of conduct upon which the rightness or wrongness of one's behavior is measured. And so in the world currently, we have two ethical systems. The first is called secularism, and the second, of course, is religion. Today, I'll only look at secular ethics vis-a-vis homosexuality. Now, secularism is a principle where God is absent. So a secular society is a society that conducts its affairs without using God as a frame of reference. Before the Industrial Revolution, we only had one ethical system throughout the world. It was a religious system. And in the religious system, it was just a question of this is good, this is bad. There was nothing like sacred and secular. But from the Industrial Revolution, looking at the works of people like Karl Marx, a secular state started developing. And I should say that one of the causes of the development of a secular state or a secular society has to do with the church, the activities of the church. The church during that time was persecuting anybody who was opposed to its teachings. And history tells us that even the church leaders were wicked, were immoral, they could fight for leadership and that kind of thing, and persecuting those who opposed the church. As a result, people started entertaining ideas and asking questions whether you have to be religious in order to do good. And looking at the writings of Karl Marx, he, of course, was a secular person. He was a secular person. And he said that, if you want to be religious, you have to be good. And looking at the writings of Karl Marx, he said that, if you want to be religious, you have to be good. And looking at the writings of Karl Marx, he said that, if you want to be religious, you have to be good. And looking at the writings of Karl Marx, he said that, if you want to be religious, you have to be good. And looking at the writings of Karl Marx, he said that, if you want to be religious, you have to be good. And looking at the writings of Karl Marx, he said that, if you want to be religious, you have to be good. And looking at the writings of Karl Marx, he said that, if you want to be religious, you have to be good. And looking at the writings of Karl Marx, he said that, if you want to be religious, you have to be good. And looking at the writings of Karl Marx, he said that, if you want to be religious, you have to be good. And looking at the writings of Karl Marx, he said that, if you want to be religious, you have to be good. And looking at the w like Immanuel Kant, Hume, Spinoza, Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche, who said God is dead, and others like William James, who came up with the philosophy of pragmatism, and I'll be mentioning about that in a while. These people, although later on William James believed in God, but these people came up with ideas, we call it the Enlightenment period, which focused on the human being as the means and end of life. And so their ideas were borrowed by the secularist society until now we came up with two distinct ethical systems, the secular and the sacred. And so I've said that a secular society is one which conducts its affairs without God being used as a frame of reference. Let me read something here about a secular society. Perhaps the best argument in favor of the view that morality does not need religion is the one by Arthur, quoted in Sartre's 2008. According to Arthur, many motives for doing the right thing have nothing whatsoever to do with the religion. He says most of us, in fact, do worry about getting caught, being blamed, and being looked down on by others. We also may do what is right because we don't want to hurt others. To say that we need religion to act morally is mistaken. Arthur concludes his argument by saying that most of us give no thought to religion when making moral decisions. So he is arguing that you do not need religion to do what is right, to do what is morally right. Now, the concept of God is diminishing in the West. So, what criteria do they have? Do they use to found ethics? No wonder, of course, homosexuality is thriving in the West because the concept of God is diminishing. Now, I'm going to interrogate homosexuality by highlighting approaches ethics. The first one is human experience, which we call pragmatism. And the second one is naturalism. That is, we are looking at the criteria upon which secular ethics are founded. So number 2 is naturalism. Number 3 is reason or scientism. So here I'm talking about scientific reason, not philosophical reasoning. And number 4 will be human development. When I deal with number 4, I think I should be coming to the end of my presentation. So let me go straight to the question of human experience. Human experience or pragmatism. Let me read. We are on human experience or pragmatism. Douglas McDermott, writing in the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, defines pragmatism as a philosophical movement that includes those who claim that an ideology or proposition is true if it works satisfactorily, that the meaning of a proposition is to be found in the practical consequences of accepting it, and that unpractical ideas are to be rejected. The outgrowth of pragmatism was Joseph Lesher's situational ethics, which, according to an online article, 2015, states that decision-making should be based upon the circumstances of a particular situation and not upon fixed law. The only absolute is love. Love should be the motive behind every decision. As long as love is your intention, the end justifies the means. Justice is not in the letter of the law, it is in the distribution of love. Probably I should have also included William James. Now, pragmatism is what works for me is good. If it does not work for you, that's your own funeral. In other words, we look at the situation, how it is. If the situation does not favor taking a certain course of action, you don't take that course of action. And if the situation favors taking a certain course of action, you take it. Now, although Joseph Fleischer has mentioned about love, there is still a question of what he means by love. Love for who? Love for the other person or love for myself or love for both? So, this thinking has given rise to what we call ethical relativity. Let me read something on ethical relativity, then I highlight, I give a few points. Ethical relativity, ethical relativism. Podman, as cited in 2008, I'm reading a book which was edited by Stephen Satries, for those who may really want to read it. The book is called Clashing Views on Moral Issues, published by Mike Grow-Hill, and the editor is Stephen Satries. So several people have contributed articles in that book, and therefore I'm reading what they have said on the issues that I am highlighting on. So I'm on ethical relativity or ethical relativism. So Podman, as cited in Satri 2008, summarizes the essence of ethical relativism as follows. 1, the diversity thesis. What is considered morally right and wrong varies from society to society, so that there are no moral principles accepted by all societies. Podman calls that the diversity thesis. Number 2, the dependency thesis. That is, all moral principles derive their validity from cultural acceptance. Let me give just a comment so that I don't have to read and then I go back. When he's saying the diversity thesis, you notice that there are no moral principles accepted by all societies. In other words, we have no right, according to him, to condemn homosexuals. If there are homosexuals in America, I mean, they are subscribing to a different moral order, and we cannot say that homosexuals are bad. If homosexuals are bad or homosexuality is bad to us, that does not mean that it should be bad to the West. And then the dependency thesis now here, it says all moral principles derive their validity from cultural acceptance. Now that's where there's a problem, because we also have a certain kind of culture in the West. And this is why homosexuals are crying, and various lobby groups who are lobbying for the rights of homosexuals are doing it because they have not received full cultural acceptance. They are stigmatized and that kind of thing. So if the culture where they are staying, where they are living, can accept them, then it is the dependency thesis. And you have no right to say that they are wrong, according to Podman. Number 3, what he calls ethical relativism. He says, therefore, there are no universally valid moral principles, objective standards which apply to all people everywhere and at all times. Now, they are defending pragmatism. They are defending pragmatism. And let me continue kidogo. In defense of this view, Haman, as cited in Statute 2008, argues that moral right and wrong, that is good and bad, justice and injustice, virtue and vice, you can put there homosexuality, are always relative to a choice of moral framework. What is morally right in relation to one moral framework, Haman says, can be morally wrong in relation to a different moral framework, and no moral framework is privileged as one true morality. What he's simply saying is that if I am religious, I cannot say that secularism is a wrong moral framework. He's saying no moral framework is privileged as one true morality. And so, you should not expect people who are secularist to say that homosexuality is bad, because they are not, they don't believe in God. They don't believe in God. And of course, I was thinking that several other terrible things are coming. As long as people are not believing in God, you have no right to tell them don't do this or don't do that, because you don't subscribe to their moral principles. However, there is a criticism of that kind of thinking. Let me read one criticism here. On ethical relativity, Podman, as cited in Statute 2008, argues that if morality is rooted in culture, each with different moral principles, then it follows that there are no universal moral principles that are valid for all cultures and peoples at all times. That's what we have heard. This form of moral subjectivity has the sorry consequence that on its premises, little or no interpersonal criticism or judgment is logically possible. You see, truth is truth universal? If truth is not universal, then judgment cannot be universal. And so if an American comes to Kenya, you cannot judge him using Kenyan law, because truth is not universal. You cannot critique somebody. You cannot teach your children what is right and what is wrong, because you don't have a right to impose your moral principles on your child, since there is ethical relativity. And if a child comes home late, you have no right to tell that child that he's late, because you cannot impose your moral principles on anybody. So you can see they are saying it is a sorry consequence that there can be no criticism. Now, what about education? How will teachers teach morality, or teachers are not supposed to teach morality? How will a teacher say that you must go to the dining hall in the morning? I just want to give a small illustration. When I was a teacher, there's a family from South Sudan which came to Kenya and found a student in one of the schools I was teaching who comes from South Sudan, staying alone in a rented house in Nairobi. He stays alone in a rented house in Nairobi, and when school's open, he comes to school. And the boy was younger than 18. They were shocked how disciplined that boy was until they asked him where he learns, and when he said, they felt no, they must bring their child who has been raised up in America and bring him to that school. When they brought that American boy, basically, he was shocked. First, that everybody must put on a uniform. Two, that going to class is a must. So he kept on asking, is it a must for me to go to class every day? Is it, you see, meaning that he has been affected by the ethical values in America. Now it became very difficult for that boy to survive. So how can you teach him that waking up early in the morning is good? It is good according to who? that putting on uniform throughout is good, according to who? So it is a sorry state, it's a sorry consequence for us to subscribe to ethical relativity, and that's pragmatism. Now, number 2 is naturalism. Naturalism. Now, naturalism is founding secular ethics on 2 things in nature. 1, the physical environment, and the 2, the wider environment. Indeed, the physical environment determines, to a certain extent, our cultural practices. If we are staying in cold countries or in a cold weather, women will have to put on long trousers unless you want them to freeze from the feet. And if you are living in tropical areas, well, maybe you can say that women should put on skirts or whatever. If you have a reason why you think that there is no problem with that, the physical environment can determine behavior, can determine culture. The things that you will eat, the pastoral communities eat flesh. Food is a cultural thing because they live in an environment where they keep animals. And so they use their skins, the animal skins, to make dresses. The physical environment. People who stay near the lake will eat fish. And they will order their lives to be in agreement with the presence of water bodies and that kind of thing. So the natural environment will determine what you do. But there is also the wider environment. The wider environment. The wider environment includes such things as birds. How do birds mate, and how do they marry, or do they do things that look like marriage? We have certain birds which pair in twos and they remain like that. When one bird dies, the wife or the husband, the other one remains like that. In other words, we are trying to found morality on the natural environment. We human beings are part of nature. We are part of nature. And our activities should fit into the natural order of things. So we learn our character from what we see in nature. And so somebody can conclude and say that doves which pair in twos and that's all teach us that you can marry one wife. But then another person can argue that in mammals, a bull has a herd. The bull has a herd. And because of that, a person can say, well, in our society, we shall have polygamy. We shall have polygamy because we can see bulls having herds. But now you can see that when male animals are born, they are fought by the stalwart, by the bull. And they go elsewhere, and you find a herd of male animals only. And that is how male starts mating among themselves, because I can say that they are under sexual pressure, mating pressure. But one by one normally comes and attack the bull here. If it defeats the bull, then it will become in charge of this and it will not mate male to male. We can look at it and people can probably say that in such a case, if males find themselves in situations where they cannot engage in intersexual relationship, and then they should do that. They are learning it from the natural environment. But there is one thing that I would like you to know. I read a science book which says that we have some insects. They need to be fertilized before they lay eggs. But in case a male insect fails to come to fertilize, then these insects will still lay eggs, and those eggs will hatch into insects neuter in gender. Probably biologists can confirm that or refute that. So insects that have been hatched that are neuter in gender, they cannot reproduce, and therefore when they die, that's the end. And if their mothers do not find male insects which will mate with them, and those mothers die, then microcosmically we can say that that species becomes extinct. And so a secular society can reason like this, that heterosexual relationship must be there in order to perpetuate the species. Otherwise, if you encourage homosexual behavior, then it means that this species is slowly becoming extinct. So, naturalism, basing our ethics on naturalism, assumes that what happens in nature is the right thing, and therefore we should order our lives in tandem with that. That is why, to a certain extent, people say that homosexuality is unnatural. Homosexuality is unnatural. But of course, we have seen that male animals which have been chased away from a herd can engage in that, in male can mate. And then but that is the exception rather than the rule. However, I'm just looking at the ethics which a secular society will design based on the natural environment. Then number three has to do with human development. What constitutes human development? What we are saying is that the ethical practices which a secular society should embrace is those practices that ensure human development. Now, according to ethical society, this is the following three things is what constitute human development. Let us look at each one of them vis-a-vis homosexuality. One is self-perpetuation or procreation. It's an assumption that man is living on this earth. Therefore, he should continue living on this earth as long as the earth remains and as long as the earth sustains life. And so, anything that will ensure procreation of the human race is good. And anything that prohibits procreation of the human race is bad. In any case, psychology says that a human being is born with three innate desires, which are the ones I'm using. The desire for self-perpetuation, and that desire is manifested, is expressed through sex. The main reason why sex exists is for self-perpetuation, but not necessarily for expression of love. Sex in the animal kingdom is not based on love. It is based on self-perpetuation. It's only in the human sense, for those of us who believe in God and who base our faith and practice on the Bible, who see the value of love within human beings. That God created the first family in his own image. Genesis chapter 1 verse 26, the right translation is that God said, let us make humanity in our image and likeness. Because when you say let them have, meaning that the word let us make man is supposed to be plural. So God was thinking of creating family. He resembling in the image and likeness of God. And God is love. Meaning that the first thing that this family is supposed to reflect, that we see as the image of God, is love. Now, in addition to love, God says, multiply. And so God, in his wisdom, gives them the gift of sex, which should be practiced within the context of love, so that a husband and a wife practice sex within the context of love, the consequence of which is procreation. And we who believe in the Bible know that the first family, there was no incest because Cain married his sister and so on. But as sin continued multiplying and creating mutations, it meant that if species that are closely related continue mating, then certain dangerous traits which have been introduced in the life of man will be multiplied and eventually will destroy man. And so several years later, rules came that close relatives should not marry. The reason is that it will inhibit the question of procreation. It will inhibit the question of procreation. So I'm saying self-perpetuation. So looking at this point pulls out homosexuality. So if homosexuality is being practiced in a secular society, and the secular society is looking at the question of human development in terms of self-perpetuation, then homosexuality is put out. Then number 2 is self-preservation. Self-preservation. Man wants to live as long as possible. Anything that promotes the life of man, anything that extends the life of man is good. And anything that makes the life of man short is bad. Okay? Then number 3, self-actualization. Self-actualization, according to a secularized society, is exploiting your potential to the highest possible point, intellectually, physically, emotionally, and so on. Does homosexuality inhibit or promote self-actualization? Man, as part of the natural environment, is heterosexual in orientation. And so many factors, including genes, very many genes. In fact, I can say that heterosexual orientation is genetically determined and not one gene. As we were saying, that scientists have been struggling to identify one particular gene that could be the cause of homosexuality, and they were calling it XQ28. Eventually, scientists have said there's no proof that there is a gene that can determine sexual homosexuality, but a variety of genes are involved in determining the sexual orientation of a person, the gender. And so naturally, all these genes have been involved in determining this person as determining his sexual orientation. Now, by acting homosexual, whether it's by default or by design, he's going against the natural order of things. And therefore, homosexuality is not exploiting the potential of that person to the highest level, because he is exhibiting unnatural and is developing unnatural feelings and unnatural emotions, even though they are caused by so many factors. But that means it is pathological, because unhealthy factors operated in his life that made him to move in this direction. We are looking at two kinds of homosexuals. We have those who decide to be homosexuals themselves, and we have those who have become homosexuals as a result of the operation of very many factors, epigenetically and environmentally, until they find themselves, not of course excluding the question of choice, they find themselves homosexuals. But even if they have found themselves homosexuals, it is still unnatural, because a natural human being, all the operations of the genes make him heterosexual in sexual orientation. So whether it's pathological or not, it is unnatural. And so we cannot argue that a homosexual, the way I was reading a magazine on homosexuality, it was saying that homosexuals are very productive. They are very productive and in terms of labor and what have you. But it is subject to debate. If you are going unnatural, I was imagining of a tree in the forest. A tree naturally is stationary. Now, because of problems in the genetical constitution of a tree, it starts moving. The tree starts moving in the jungle. You will notice that that tree will prevent birds from staying on them, animals that use the tree, because they're not so sure about the movement of the tree. So you cannot say that this tree is developing, is contributing to the development of other trees or even itself. So it is not possible to conclude that a homosexual person can become self-actualized fully. Now, let's assume that self-actualization may involve certain things as athletics. So this person is well-built muscularly, and he has to engage in a serious athletics so that he may become the best athlete in the whole world. Um, Athletics and very many other things thrive on a proper mental framework. Assuming that this person is an intellectual is also emotional. So if his emotions are unnatural, we cannot expect this unnatural emotion to participate in the development of his intellect. They must come somewhere as an inhibition. So you can see the argument. If something is unnatural, it cannot be considered as a factor that contributes to the development of that individual. And so, because development is holistic, emotionally, mentally, physically, socially, already a homosexual is engaging in an activity that seems strange from the social activities that are being done by man. So we cannot say that this person is getting developed socially. Let's see. How can somebody be socially developed? The role of the family is very important. A man who is unmarried, in as much as he can be intellectual and what have you, but socially is not very well developed as compared to a married man. When you marry, there is something which your wife contributes in your social development. You will learn to control your anger. You learn so many things, and wives are experts in doing that. And then when children come into your life, your social capacity or ability expands. Okay, so it is not preposterous to suppose that an unmarried man who has grown until he's 70 and a married man who has grown up to 70 as grandchildren, that an unmarried man could be socially more well developed than a married man. Unless, of course, we can do that kind of experiment, assuming that all of them, both of them have lived in the same environment, holding other things constant. Because if the homosexual has also had the opportunity of traveling outside the country, doing this job and doing that job, assuming that also the married man has done that. So when we compare, you find that a homosexual, because he has married, there are only two people there. I'm looking at a pure homosexual, him and another man, or a woman and a woman. So we cannot say that homosexuality can contribute towards the highest level of personal development. And so when we say that we are founding our ethics based on self-actualization, then you see that homosexuality is also losing out on this. For us who believe in the Bible, Ephesians 4:12 talks about true development. Ephesians 4:11 and 12 is talking about acquisition of spiritual gifts for the equipping of the saints, for the work of ministry, for the edifying of the body of Christ, till we all come to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to a perfect man, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. It is surprising, of course, that homosexuals want to be accepted in church as part of their even association, a gay association of Christians. Probably they do not believe in these things which the Bible teaches. Of course, I'll be looking at the biblical argument tomorrow. They feel that we must reinterpret the Bible. We shall look at how they interpret and the correct way of interpreting the Bible. But what we are saying here is that it is by engaging in ministry, which is just serving other people. Ministry of the church is the same as benevolent ministries by other people and non-governmental organizations. We are serving the poor, we are serving what, we are serving what, we are serving what, but also we are worshiping God, and that's the difference. And so service to humanity as a whole develops people morally until they reach a point where the Bible is describing as the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. If a person is not, ethically speaking, abiding by the principles of the Bible, for example, then we can assume that that person cannot develop very highly. However, we are looking at secularism where people don't believe in God. So a secularist society will critique, will look at homosexuality as something that is not developing somebody to the highest level, looking at socially and others. Now, the next one, the last one is reason. Reason or scientism. I'm looking at scientific reasoning. Scientific reasoning. And let me just read something. Let me move quickly. 2.24. Scientism. Let me read. Scientism. Barnett 2015 quotes Olson, who defines scientism as efforts to extend scientific ideas, methods, practices, and attitudes to matters of human social and political concern. And Ryder 2013 sees scientism as a philosophical position that exalts the methods of the natural sciences. Scientism embraces only empiricism and reason to explain phenomena of any dimension, whether physical, social, cultural, or psychological. Considering Holyoake's definition of secularism, one cannot fail to see scientism as its corollary. Holyoake wrote, "The name of secularism was given to certain principles which had for their object human improvement by material means, regarding science as the providence of man, and justifying morality by considerations which pertain to this life alone." In other words, what is right is what science shows that it is right. Okay? And we reason, and they are mentioned that natural sciences, we have social sciences such as sociology, psychology, and what have you. Now, examples. Who should you marry? Secularism uses science. Science should help us to know who to marry. And the physical scientists probably will say that don't marry a relative because in your family you could be having a trait that is not good, that can destroy humanity. So you have to marry. Science is helping us to do that. Don't condemn homosexuality because genes have said that homosexuality is correct. Here they have failed. And so a scientist and a secularist on the basis of scientism will destroy homosexuality, meaning that homosexuality does not seem to fit into a secularist society. What to dress and how. Science tells us that when it is cold, you should put on warm clothing and you should cover all your limbs, the upper torsos and the lower torsos, or whatever they call them. And what to eat. Science tells us that we have got food that is not good for health. There's the carbohydrates, protein, and what have you. Yes. But we are saying when you look at scientism, it will dismiss homosexuality by reason of functional incompatibility of genitalia. Functional incompatibility of genitalia, because science teaches that organs on a human body have got functions. And if you put that organ in a function that naturally is not meant for it, then science will have to dismiss that. It is like using the lower part of your body in eating food instead of using the mouth, or using your head to walk. The head was not meant for walking naturally. And science can explain how feet are the ones that should be used for walking, and how the brain balances the feet and what have you. Science teaches us that the hand should be used for this and that. And during the development, the coordination of the organs of the body are put in place. Now, if you start using one organ for that which naturally was not meant for it, we are calling it functional incompatibility. I don't want to talk in details about how the genitalia of these people are used